First of all, welcome everybody to our October Pacific Northwest AES meeting. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. We have an exciting meeting planned for you. And I'm going to first start out by making just a couple announcements about some of the things that we have going on. Next month, on November 11th, at this same time, 6 p.m., we are having our November meeting. And our presenter for November will be engineer Tom Fine. And I'd like to extend the microphone over to Rick Chin to talk a little bit about Tom. Rick is helping us organize that meeting.
Tom is the youngest son of the late Bob Fine and Wilma Cozart Fine, and they were the recording team that put together the Mercury Living Presence recording series. So pioneers in minimalist recording, and their stereo releases were done with 2 mics, just an AB Omni setup, and then with a center channel mic also. So all 3-channel stereo, and captured to 3 channels on mag film generally. And then for the reduction to LP, Wilma would read the score and direct the mastering engineer with hand signals as they took the 3-track tape and reduced it to 2 channels without an intervening generation.
Wow.
So Tom's the keeper of that flame, and he's been supervising the remastering and re-release of that catalog.
Excellent.
So
thank you.
Tom will talk to us about what his mother was doing at the end of the project.
Excellent. Great. I should mention too that I'm the Pacific Northwest Section Chair. And the other person that I wanted to extend the microphone to for a brief announcement is Dan Mortensen, who will tell you a little bit about another series that we have going on that Dan is leading. So Dan, could you tell the folks a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. It's a Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock Seattle time for 2.5 or 3 hours, where we just get together and talk about any audio subject that we feel like talking about. And it's we've had some focusing on history of concert sound and shows that we've been to. Last week, one of our members, who I think is here, talked about her time touring with New Power Generation, which is Prince's band. And Tom Fine has been there a lot of times and talked about various record production technology. And the next one is I'm the co-chair of the historical and sound reinforcement tracks for the upcoming AES convention, which is next week. And I'll be talking about what it's like being involved in that and what's in those tracks. And it's pretty much what anybody wants to talk about and who is enthusiastic about it. We love hearing stuff and seeing pictures about things. So if you want to come to it, I'll send you the link. Send me a message here and I will get it and send you the Zoom link for it. And thank you.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Dan. And so I'd like to extend a thanks to Jim Rondinelli, one of our committee members, for helping organize and moderate tonight's event. And I'm going to extend the mic over to Jim to talk a little bit, to introduce himself and to introduce our panelists. Thanks.
Well, hi, everybody. Greg, thanks, and thanks for having us here today. on behalf of the chapter, I want to welcome our three guests today, who I'll talk about in a little bit greater detail. We've got Maureen Droney is the managing director of the producers and engineers wing of the Recording Academy. She's joined here by Dick Huey, founder of the Toolshed Group and head of business development for music metadata provider Jaxta, who we'll speak a little bit about today. And I'm also joined by fellow University of Iowa alumni and my dear friend Vicki Nauman, who is the founder of a firm called Cross Border Works, and who's been instrumental in a number of music services in unpacking metadata and the problems associated with metadata as we seek proper attribution and compensation for our work. So with that, I'm going to take over the screen, if this all works well, and proceed with our presentation. So give me just a quick second. There we go. So, topic of today.
Not yet. Not seeing
yet.
it yet.
Stand by. Switching pages, not seeing the mouse. Give me 1 second. I apologize for the screen crisis here. How's that, everybody?
Got it.
There you go.
Fantastic. So, by way of introduction, I started my career producing and mixing records, and I had a reasonably successful career, but in 1998, I started seeing the inevitability of digital music distribution. And when I found the opportunity to, I joined an early digital music distributor, mp3.com, and I've worked in a number of music services since then. Most recently, Ardio, where I ran all things related to content and operations. And one of the things that I became very personally interested in as we evolved from physical distribution and physical product to digital distribution was how artists and creators would be properly credited for and compensated for their work. Now, in the early days of digital music, it's no secret that there were some real problems getting artists and even rights holders paid properly for the work as it was being used by music services. And that's not necessarily the fault of the services themselves, but it's the data around music and music rights, music compositions and the underlying recordings just wasn't publicly extensible in a way that we could generate payments to people. So I've taken a personal interest in this issue over the last now 20 years, and am really pleased to see that we, through the work of Maureen and Vicki and Dick and some other people in this industry, we're really on a path to the world becoming a better place. Part of the world becoming a better place, particularly when it comes to attribution and compensation for stakeholders in music, is to make sure that everybody knows best practices and even knows why it's so important to have proper metadata associated with your work. So as I mentioned today, we're joined by a pretty esteemed panel here. So Maureen is Senior Managing Director of the P&E wing of the Recording Academy, but it should not be missed that Maureen engineered some killer recordings with Aretha Franklin, with Whitney Houston, and with Carlos Santana. So please welcome Maureen. Dick Huey, I mentioned earlier, is the head of commercial partnerships for Jaxta. Jaxta is a new service that you should all check out at www.jaxta.com. Dick was instrumental in bringing Spotify's, in licensing independent music onto Spotify's platform, particularly leading up to their US expansion. Dick has also functioned as the de facto new media department, as they called it in the old days, and digital department as we call it in the new days, for a number of labels, including Matador. He's done a lot of work with Merge. He sat on the board of Sound Exchange, and his own company, Toolshed Media, provides marketing services to a number of technology and music hybrid companies. Also joined by Vicky Nauman, who I mentioned is the founder of Cross Border Works. You know, in our own backyard, Vicky set up one of the country's first what's referred to as DMCA compliant radio stations in KEXP when they started simulcasting on KEXP.com. Vicky also ran licensing in a number of services, was instrumental in the licensing department at MusicNet, which was one of the first real content aggregators at 7 Digital, who continue to operate as the back end for a number of third-party music services. And Vicky was tapped by Spotify to help them really sort out the metadata and attributions mess. So I've talked about myself a little bit, so let me just kind of go on to what is metadata and why is it so important. So metadata can simply be seen as a subset of information used to describe a file. And, you know, in our case, we make these robust audio or audio video works, but there's some key attributes in addition to the information about who created and who participated in the work. There's some key attributes that we ought to be sharing with people. That make it easier for people to find and utilize our work. And in some cases, there are some great examples of that metadata actually becoming more important than the content itself. For example, I hold as 2 examples, Google I use all the time for this discussion, but Facebook as well. Neither of them really own content, but they've built tremendous businesses on the backs of artists and creators by making their work more accessible, more extensible, easier to find by associating metadata and subsets of metadata with the work. So let's just kind of put this into a framework. Today on Spotify, Spotify received uploads of somewhere between 45 and 50,000 recordings. So stop and pause and think about that. It's 50,000 recordings, which may have, in some cases, 4, 6, 8 participants on the recording side. In a modern R&B song, it's not uncommon to have 10 co-writers, 12, 14 co-writers, all of whom need to be compensated for their work and distributed and properly attributed for their work. All of a sudden, that 50,000, it's really easy for us to imagine that 50,000 number becoming 1 million pieces of data that were newly generated on Spotify's platform today. And it's that way for every music service that's out there. So again, enormous amounts of data being generated by the work that we create, right? And as time goes on, an enormous need to make sure that we're properly attributed and properly compensated for our work. And this is where all of these things merge. So why do we think this is important? And I mean, we're going to give some great examples of this in the course of our discussion today. Our number one way of generating work as audio engineers and audio engineering enthusiasts is to be credited for the work that we've done. People find us via our recordings. And when we made the transition from a physical marketplace selling shiny pieces of plastic to a digital marketplace, a lot of that information got lost and misplaced. We now have the opportunity to reintegrate that information back into our work. In the near future, and Maureen will be able to speak to this more specifically, this is going to lead directly to compensation for your contribution to recording as a recording engineer, and Vicky and Dick can speak to it facilitating compensation for your work as a performing artist or as a composer as well. One of the other things that we realize is so important about this that we were discussing last night in our setup for this meeting is how important metadata is and the proper association of metadata is and to facilitate the programming of your work. And I'll give you one very, very simple example. We are seeing a lot of music licensing activity now for the fitness space companies like Peloton and Mir and every other remote fitness company, in addition to gyms and the personal trainer business, all looking to enrich their training experiences with specifically programmed music for their workouts. One of the number one things that they're looking to understand on first is, do you have the BPM for the track? If that's extensible, the odds that my work is going to get used and I will receive compensation for that work is a hell of a lot higher than it is if I don't have that information. So that's just one example. Another example is, show me all the records that Steve Gadd played drums on. I'm a Steve Gadd fan. I want to go and listen to his library. And we can imagine that being a really meaningful search criteria for someone else. So just a couple of quick examples. There are some threshold glossary terms that we're going to discuss today, and we're just this is the last little bits of setup we have before we get into panel discussion. We're going to be referring to a few industry acronyms today. We're also going to be discussing both master recordings and compositions as well. So let me kind of back into this with the glossary side. We're going to talk a little bit about DDEX, which is an organization that was set up by the music industry to focus on the development of standards to improve the efficiency of data transfer between stakeholders, whether it's recording companies or music publishers or collection societies. We're going to talk a little bit about ISRC codes, which are International Standard Recording Codes, which are typically obtained from a distributor, although we'll talk a little bit about that in the process today. We'll talk a little bit about ISWCs, which are the equivalent of the ISRC, but for the composition, the underlying composition that's represented on the recording. We're also going to speak a little bit about ISNIs, which are standard name identifiers, which aren't unique to music, but are unique to all artistic works. And a great example of something that can be fixed by proper attribution of an ISNI, imagine a band with a number in the title. The fifth dimension, boy, I'm dating myself now. The fifth dimension, is that expressed as the number 5 TH dimension? Is that the words the fifth FIFTH dimension? All of those can result in a different royalty stream and a different, and in some cases, the absence of consistent attribution for that performance can actually sidetrack compensation to the artist. And then finally, we're going to speak a little bit about the recording information notification program that's been set up by DDEX, which Maureen is an expert on. So last little bit of threshold discussion, master rights versus compositions. When we talk about masters, we're talking about the recordings that we create in the recording studio of a specific performance of a composition as represented on CDs or tapes or vinyl. And when we talk about compositions, we're talking about the underlying work, either with or without lyrics, that was created by a composer. And the easiest way I've been able to express this to people is a part of the song that you can represent on a piece of sheet music or a piece of tablature. I'm going to go on a screen share for a second, and I'd like to do a quick audit of the room. How many of you in the room, and if you could just indicate by a show of hands, how many of you in the room are actually content creators or creators first, either engineers or artists functioning as engineers? Great. How many of you are also actually composers and composing your own work?
Okay.
So actually this is an interesting composition, because we at the moment are seeing more composers, or at least more composers have raised their hands, if I'm reading this audit right, our unscientific audit, than have raised their hands for content creators. So it's interesting. How many of you derive most of your income from the recording of music? Okay, great. Excellent. And then how many of you are students?
Does student of life count?
Yeah, student of life, student of the School of Hard Knocks. Fantastic. we've got a couple of people volunteering for that. Thank you, Janie. Excellent. Good. Okay, super. So we've talked a little about masters and compositions, and let me kind of bring this back to practical experience. And let me start with Maureen. Maureen, you know, the Recording Academy has been really instrumental in pushing a lot of ads to the media about proper attribution for musicians, songwriters. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing at the P&E wing and the importance of it and how you see this overlaying in the future?
Well, one of the things you're probably referring to is Behind the Record. It's the second year that we have dedicated a day each year, although it's ongoing throughout the year, to recognize the creators behind records. And that's basically a digital campaign, Instagram, Facebook, anywhere else, and having artists create album covers basically that have liner notes on them. And just overall support, what's called the global initiative, overall support for the fact that the creators behind the scenes do a lot of the work and are often unrecognized. So this is the second year that we've done that. But yes, I mean, since I started my job, which was actually just about 15 years ago, when Mike Klink, who was Guns N' Roses producer, said to me, "Why aren't our credits on iTunes?" I started down the path of something that was seemingly simple to people who had come into the industry in the era when there were albums and CDs, where even though the print was smaller, you actually could read the liner notes. And now that we've transitioned into digital files, I always say we left some of the housekeeping behind, right? We didn't really think about, and engineers are to blame for some of this, because the fact that you could have random access and not have to wait for the tape machine to roll back, and that you could have unlimited tracks, whether that's a blessing or a curse, I don't know. But engineers, you know, took to digital, and but we didn't solve a lot of the problems like labeling. We didn't solve crediting. We didn't even solve how to get paid when you could make perfect copies, right? So everything kind of fell apart, you know? And then there was a recession, right? Which meant people at the labels who had been there for years and understood the importance of liner notes and credits were no longer there. You know, you've heard the stories about empty office buildings, lots of empty offices in the years of the recession. And people got out of the habit of making that part of the process and knowing how important it was. And then of course you had digital services, which really don't have anywhere to display the credits and the information about the recordings, although they often say they would like to, because they think it would help their business model and it would help make better playlists if people could read more about who did what and what else those people did. So the chain kind of got broken all the way through, and we're having to reinvent it. And we're having to reinvent it in a world when there's, as Jim pointed out, such an incredible volume of music being made, and by more numbers of people in general who may have some rights to it, the way records are made today. So we kind of had to start all over. And there was a lot of finger pointing. You know, in the beginning, the labels would say, well, we give the services everything that we have, and the services saying, no, they don't. So it took a while to get over the mountain of the fact that the people who know, and I'll finish up with this because I can go on and on. It's been a lot of my life for a long time, but the people who know what happened in the studio at the time it happened is really the most valuable information, because for a while we were so used to liner notes and approvals, and it was only real when all of that was signed off on, right? And everybody agreed that this was the producer, this person had played this guitar part, okay, it went into print, it was on something you could see. But now without that information, I'm losing track of my thoughts, but without that information now, and nowhere to see it, we kind of have to rebuild the whole thing over again.
So let me use that as a jumping off point and to kind of illustrate this from the other side.
Sorry. Let me just finish, Jim, because
Standing by.
I did lose my train of thought. And it comes back to that the mountain we got over was that people do believe that the information that as it happens in the studio needs to be collected because they're the only ones who really know. And if you're trying to add this information a week or 2 weeks or a month later, you're probably going to miss things. Sorry.
No, that's a really important point, and to capture all this stuff contemporaneously is so critical. I want to kind of look at this from the other side of the equation, from the consumer side and from the songwriter side. And with that, let me introduce Vicky. So Vicky, could you tell us a little bit about some of the work and some of the problems that you had to unravel, both at MusicNet and Spotify, particularly with respect to composers?
Yeah, it's I remember it was probably like 8 or 9 years ago, and I was licensing a music service for Samsung, an on-demand service. And I started, I was working at 7 Digital, and we were matching the master recording to the publishing within Harry Fox. And that's really part of this process, is that music, the master recording is decoupled from publishing information, which makes it really, really challenging because the DSPs, the digital services, they all work with master recordings. There's a supply chain now from DDEX, labels putting things into DDEX formats and getting those distributed into all the services. There's, like as Maureen was saying, in the early days of music, that was a mess too, because we used to have things like Jay-Z, and it would be Jayz, Jay-hyphen-Z, Jayzee, Jay-Z. And so what was happening is this, consumers were searching and trying to find music, and they couldn't find it. And it was really that the user experience wasn't allowing consumers to find the music they were looking for. That was a catalyst to get the labels to clean this metadata up. On the publishing side, you don't have a catalyst like that. It's like the DSPs ingest the sound recordings. They, we all listen to them, then they report back out, and then after the fact, there are rights management companies that have to match these sound recordings and publishing. And the way music is created today, it's very typical to have 8, 9, 10 splits on every song. So when you think of 50,000 songs a day and 50 million songs in any service, if you have 10 rights holders, you're at 500 million data points on just who to pay. And I realized, like, oh my gosh, there's a massive problem because these things they're not getting matched up. And so there's all sorts of money that started just falling out of the ecosystem. And my best metaphor for this is, if you have a garden, and Dick's heard this before because we're both avid gardeners, but if you have a garden in the back of your house, and you have a spigot in the front of your house, you take a watering bucket, you fill it up with water, and you don't notice that it's leaking. And by the time you get to your garden, you only have a tiny bit of water left. And where is it? It's everywhere. It's all spilled out and you can't recover it. And that's exactly what has happened with money in music publishing. It has spilled out, and there have been private solutions. There's Harry Fox, there's MRI, there's different services that have been built to address this problem, but it became so enormous, and it was getting to be so litigious with all of the services being sued that the catalyst for publishing data cleanup was really the Music Modernization Act, and bringing together the digital services, the technology companies, the publishing rights owners and individual songwriters. And this was passed in 2018, and it is going to be implemented starting in January 2021, which is only a few months away. And what's really important there is that this is only for Section 115, which is permanent downloads and on-demand streaming, but it's a centralization of all of the publishing information, and the publishers themselves are being given tools to be able to keep their data current. And we're still going to have problems with matching because, you know, the services use sound recordings and this is publishing, but it's a monumental leap forward. And you know, my hope, you know, whenever there's leakage in revenues like this, it oftentimes gets settled out by the biggest market share controlling companies in the landscape. And I feel like I'm always an advocate for individual artists, individual songwriters, and the smaller companies in the ecosystem, that I think it can really level the playing field in getting your data cleaned up so that you're getting paid for what you've rightfully earned.
So I'd like to just put a little a quantum on that for the understanding of our audience. Universal reported this morning, if I saw this correctly, in music business worldwide, that they had $1 billion quarter for recorded music on the digital side. That's one quarter. So let's put that in perspective. Based on the blended average of music publishing rates worldwide, which I would stack between 15 and 18%, it's 150 million to 180 million US from one of the majors that has roughly 25-ish% global market share.
Yeah, probably pretty close to 30%.
Yeah, probably close to 30%. So we're talking about $500 million in publishing royalties available this quarter.
Right.
And a lot of that stuff, there are a couple of problems that we saw in music services. One was that the metadata would actually show up late because it would take people 6 months to decide what the splits were on the Beyonce single.
Yep, exactly.
The other problem that we'd have is that even a typo can put a payment into a suspense category in an unsophisticated database. Now, if you think about the metaphor, right, when we used to buy shiny pieces of vinyl, we bought all that stuff rights inclusive, and now DSPs are unfortunately in the position where they have to buy things on a rights exclusive basis, meaning you have to patch all these rights together, which ties it over to JAXTA. And Dick, I'm wondering if you could take a few minutes and tell us about JAXTA's mission and the work that you guys are doing to restore attribution and credits and make that extensible to the industry.
Sure. So I think even before I do that, I would step back just a little bit to just to talk about liner notes in general, and the idea that, I mean, when I grew up buying records, buying CDs, buying music, liner notes were my resource for figuring out what I wanted to buy next. And it was always on a budget. I could only buy so much music. So I would figure out what I wanted next by looking at who mastered it, or who engineered it, or who produced it, Jim, since you produced one of the records of one of my bands that I managed. So, you know, that sort of started dribbling away in the aughts. And, you know, by the time we got to the mid 2015s, as you discussed earlier, you know, really we had just lost the liner note. And at the time I was looking for a new project to get involved with, and I was looking for a sort of a big problem to help fix. I'd just gotten out doing some work for the Future of Music Coalition on artist advocacy. And that was when I met Jackie Louis Schurl, who, along with her husband, who's a pop producer, very successful pop producer for Sony, had started this little project called JAXTA, which was about informational metadata. So this is not the side that, at least initially, it's not the side that you just heard Vicky talk about. So this is not This is not a product to help you be paid accurately. This is just the information itself. This is who produced a particular record, who engineered it, who played on it. And all this information that just got lost with the transition from physical to digital and is just now starting to dribble back into the marketplace is what JAXTA was built to create. So JAXTA is an official metadata or an official data platform that displays official metadata from labels. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by official? Well, in the absence of metadata online, in the absence of liner notes, digital liner notes, you had all these services that sprung up to sort of fill the void. You had Wikipedia, you had Discogs, you had Music Brains, and these are all databases that were basically created by music fans in one way or another. Wikipedia wasn't, but it became a place where you could find the information that was really missing. And what we thought was missing at JAXTA was an actual official presentation of metadata. So metadata that wasn't put there by a fan, but metadata that was put there by the creator of the metadata. So, you know, the problem with sourcing metadata from fans is A, it might be wrong, and B, what if somebody's pretending to be someone who they're not, which happens, unfortunately. So when you source your metadata only from official sources, and when I say official sources, what do I mean? I mean record labels, I mean publishers, I mean distributors. The places where you send your music, or, you know, if you're an artist or you're a manager, the places where you would send your music to make it available on on-demand streaming services, for instance. So you do that through a distributor, or the places that would collect revenue for your music, for the use of your music, at PROs, for instance. Those are all official sources, and that's where we built the JAXTA database. And you know, many of the people on this call we worked very closely with. Maureen, for instance, has just been absolutely essential in helping us create this resource that is an official resource of information. Well, okay, and again, why do you need an official resource? Well, if you're going to license that metadata, all that information, to different sources that might use that for commerce, so that could be voice-activated services, for instance, you want to make sure that what you're licensing is accurate. If it's not accurate and you're licensing it, it can create problems. We live in a super litigious society. There are instances where communicating the wrong information could create a problem, could create an embarrassing situation for an artist or for a manager. So in order to avoid that, we built JAXTA. And JAXTA is a place where you can not only move around through the provenance of music, or sort of go down the rabbit hole, so to speak, you know, look at a particular release, for instance, and who played on that. Oh, cool, what did they do? You can click on that and look at that. Anyway, that's what we built at JAXTA, and I'm very excited about it, as you can probably tell.
Super, super. Thanks for that, Dick. So, Maureen, I'm not sure how familiar, and Vicky, I think you may be able to speak to this as well. I understand that in some of the EU territories, there is a move afoot to guarantee some sort of profit participation to sidemen, producers, and engineers associated with the neighboring rights stream. Could you pick that up a little bit?
Started in Ireland, as far as I know. Vicky, you probably know more about this.
I don't feel like I know enough of the details on this, but I think you're right, and I think that some of this came out of the you know, when we had Article 17, and which is a directive around, you know, one particular area of copyright law, which was related to UGC and the, you know, user generated services and upload services like YouTube. But there were a number of other things that were built into that had additional rights. And And I think that, everyone is kind of starting to look around the world and shoring up systems and realizing that there are some unintended consequences. Now, some people think they're intentional consequences. I
Right.
choose to feel like we have enough conspiracy theories in the world right now. But I think moving from radio and physical goods to all digital goods has created chaos in many different societies around the world, and collection societies, I mean, and systems. And neighboring rights is absolutely one of these. And most people in the US don't know very much about it.
Specifically, what Jim was referring to is in the United States, and some of you know this, performers are not paid when you hear them on over-the-air broadcast radio, right? The example we always use is Otis Redding wrote Respect. Otis gets paid when you hear it on broadcast radio. Aretha doesn't, who performed the big hit Respect. In other countries around the world, most other countries, we always say we're in the axis of evil of Iran, China, and I forget what the
North Korea. North Korea is the third one that doesn't.
Don't pay the performers, and because we don't pay performers, we don't receive the monies that the countries that do collect for performers pay. They just pay their own countries' performers, and they don't pay the United States because we don't reciprocate. This goes back to 1956 and the Treaty of Rome, which we didn't sign. But what's stirring in Europe is a feeling that is wrong, and that the performers should be paid no matter what country they're in. So I don't know any further details on it and how that's progressing, but I was delighted to see that that's being brought up, and people are looking at it on an ethical basis of performers should be paid no matter where they live. That might push the United States. The broadcasting industry is very powerful, and they have fought this all along because they didn't want to pay out extra money. But it's interesting to see this developing as this worldwide trend.
One of the
Can I
things.
add something to this, Jim? Can I just real quick? So, one of this whole argument that because we don't have this right in the United States, or this collection in the United States, we don't distribute it internationally, that they shouldn't have to send it to us, ignores the fact that we distribute satellite revenues worldwide, and they're distributed worldwide from Sound Exchange. And if you look at the amount of money that flows that way versus what comes in, or what would come in, it's bigger going out than coming in. So it isn't really a very legitimate excuse.
Yeah, and again, and I just want to add that my understanding is that there are some efforts to actually resolve this in China that are in process now. So that really leaves it like the United States, North Korea, and Iran as the three countries that are the scofflaws in terms of not recognizing a neighboring right or a performance right for a recording artist. But one of the questions, and this is kind of where it comes into brass tacks for us as creators, those of us who are living in the studio. So think about this for a second. We don't have assistant engineers anymore. When I was producing records, and I stopped doing it on a full-time basis in 1999, I had an AFM contract that I had to fill out with all the sideline information for every record and every session that I did. And I just had to do that to get paid by the record company. That doesn't exist anymore. And, that was stuff I generally tended to do myself, but I would sometimes farm out to an assistant engineer. Assistant engineers don't really exist in the way that we record most sessions these days. So who's going to handle this work, and why is this work getting stuck on us, and why isn't it the labels? So with that, I want to take a couple of minutes to drag in Steve Turnage to talk a little bit about a couple of tools that are available. One of them is Rune, and one of them is Sound Credit. So Steve, if you could take over for a few, we'd love to see what you have to show us.
Let's see if it works here. That'll be good. So first, I'll share screen, and let's go into Rune, because that's one of my favorite things. It looks like I'm only able to hit the, is that showing up for everybody?
Yes.
Yay. I would like to hear from someone. Name a band, a favorite band.
Can we go deep?
Anywhere. Well, let's try it. That's the beauty of it, is let's find out.
June.
Who?
June.
June. Okay, so we're gonna
Good
look.
choice, Jim.
Thank you.
Is this June? Which June is it? This is the this.
I'm seeing, let's see here. Here we are. There is an artist called June, but feel free to pick any of these.
Okay, well, actually,
Hold on.
what let's do, just to make it easy, let's talk about Pink Floyd,
Nice.
because then we all know where we're at. The beautiful thing about Rune is a metadata aggregator. And the things that Jim was talking about before that basically license information, if we go into settings and we go into about, we see that Rune licenses from all of these places. So it's just like, you know, water or power, where you don't get all of the different power companies and association with. You actually, it gets aggregated and put to your house. And so this is like that, where it can take, Pink Floyd gives you the images. So none of this is actually on my computer, and I am streaming it. That gives you this information here, which is basically like your liner notes and credits that you would find on a record, but more like a box set. It gives you information about the band, including links to each of those people. It gives you their albums that you can hit. It derives its data. The music actually can come in from a few different places, and for me, it's on top of Tidal and it's on top of Qobuz, and each of these are high-res audio, and it also is pointed out from my local drives. So as a mastering engineer and being around for 23 years now, I can find within a moment anything I've ever done and get right to it, which is a beautiful thing. So what let's do is let's go back to Pink Floyd again, and let's just look at Dark Side of the Moon here. In this case, I've got one that I had bought at 96.24, and it tells us about this particular release. It gives you great art, and this is the part that's killer, is here it gives in depth all the people that made this happen, including things like this, which is the people that designed the album art, Hypnosis, and Storm Thurgeson, for instance. And what he's worked on, here's production. And that's interesting because I have seen this few albums. I've seen these kinds of things with a huge amount of stuff. But so Rune is fabulous. Here's another aspect of it that are helpful, which is if we go into sorted by most played here, and we go into focus, we can say, I want to see in my library all of the music from the 80s, or all of the music from any given arbitrary number. And this is all driven by that metadata that is held in Jaxta and all these other places. So that's one benefit of this. The other thing that I personally like a lot is I'm a big high-res audio fan. So on the 24-bit files, 192, 1796, for instance, now I see all of the things that I love that are 9624, and I can just play them directly from there.
Steve, that's a library you created on Rune?
It is a library that is created automatically based on my parts of my libraries in Tidal and in Qobuz and my local music. So here's the science of deduction, for instance, and if I'm interested, I mastered them. If I want to view the file info, I can open the file location, and I don't know if it's going to show up because I think I only have Rune showing up instead of, this is probably not coming up for you, is it? Probably not.
Yeah, it's not coming up.
Okay, well, anyway, it opened up a Explorer window, and I immediately have access to everything I've ever done for them.
So, quick
So
question:
that's-
Steve,
Yeah.
could you share with us a little bit about? So, this is super interesting because it shows us some of the ways that we can find content in a sea of content. But how do we get into our sessions in the first place? And let's spend a few
Oh,
minutes
okay. Yeah,
discussing
we'll
that.
shift over then. Let me stop this screen share.
Could I ask a couple of questions about Rune, though, from the
Oh,
futurists?
please, yeah.
Please.
You were the first one who turned us on to that, probably 5 or more years ago.
Yeah, it's about
What does it cost per month?
it's $120 a year, and then
So
they
ten,
have
so
10
$10 a month,
paid
$120, right?
yearly.
And it works with Tidal and Cobuzz, right?
And your local files.
And your local files. Why do you think so few people know about it at this point or aren't using it?
It's sort of an audiophile thing that people are looking at. It's I wish more people knew about it. I tell everyone that I can tell about it. The other thing that because it knows your metadata of the things you like, it's able to do things in the background in this discover page. Like for instance, here's a collaboration on these different things, you know, and it gives you places, different exposures to your own music area. So this is one of my albums, and unfortunately, I don't have deep metadata in here because my label that gives to my distributor doesn't add all of this stuff. So that drives me nuts. But I need to find it at one point. So what let's do is, I'm going to stop this share and start another share and go into sound credit. And here, this is a thing that's going to save my life, I hope. This is a thing that Gabriel Waddell has done. And you're able to, he's made this into both a, whoops, that was wrong, standby.
We've still got you.
Yeah, it flipped out over here. That's all good. You can put information onto any number of tracks with the different participants. So here is the information from me that I can put in and then throw into any song that I do later, and all this information is already there. So that's convenient. It lets you show the equipment that you're using. If you add equipment, for instance, and say, what do you want? And so guitar, you know, any given stuff.
I use my Fairchild 670.
Exactly. And then that all gets put in, and then here's the lyrics that is set and the recording details. And what you can do with this is you can actually export to to different release capabilities, including CD inserts that'll put all of the metadata and the lyrics in like a CD insert in a vinyl sleeve that makes it a 12-inch vinyl sleeve for all the information. ML sound exchange output in the format appropriate. It's just amazing what they've done, and it's still early. It's still difficult. It's still difficult to make it work yet. I'm still just wrangling with it. At some point, though, this and Rune and Jaxta are all pointing towards an era where things are going to be able to be captured as they're done. So as you're in the room, and then put in a place that can be found, and then delivered to people that need to see it. So that's what this is. And RIN is a recording information notification. It was brought up earlier, and this makes RIN files that have all this information that you can pass along with these files to other places that will accept them and get all your information in one place. And again, instead of having to load in all of these pieces of information each time you're doing a song, this will save for you participants, and you say add participant, and it already has all their information. And so it's super, super cool.
Steve,
Yes.
it's Rick. Is there
Hi,
a
Rick.
way to batch upload this?
Well, there's another aspect to it, and unfortunately, I'm only able to show. Let's see. I'm going to try and share screen again, and I'm going to share my Chrome. Stand by, and I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to go to sound credit, and then it's like home. Home. Here it is. They have a thing where you can upload your information onto their site. This is sort of like Jaxta, but different. Here's Eric Gales. If we look into it, we can see each of their songs. So if you upload from sound credit up to here, like an indie upload, you can go in and get all of this information of all of these songs that all these different people are on. So this is another aspect. And you can share the link. That's one thing. Another excellent, well, I just found this out today, muso.ai. If I put, turn in here, I gotta spell my own name right. It actually came up with it, and Dick, I want to point this out to you. It came up with automatically, as with artificial intelligence as it goes in, my credits. It just came right. Here's a UMen box set that
I'm aware of it, Steve.
I know you are. It's just I'm trying to get my credits in Jaxta, but that'll work great when it happens. So that surprised me a lot.
It might help if we explained why your credits aren't in Jaxta.
Please do. Okay.
Great question.
That is a good
So
question.
it's a totally legit and great question. And the reason they aren't is for the very reason that I outlined earlier, which is if you only take official credits, so muso.ai is using artificial intelligence, the AI stands for, to go out and pre-fill what it thinks is your presentation of metadata. And then it's asking you to go in and indicate that it's accurate. It's a different approach than only allowing information to come into the system that comes from a distributor. And so the reason, I guess my perspective on this, other than it's a beautiful app, and you should absolutely play with it. In fact, you should play with all of these things. And if you have any questions about them, I recommend you get in touch with Steve. Because Steve has given me, I think, maybe 3 1-hour demos on this, which is I'm not slapping you down, Steve. You're probably the person I know that has the broadest knowledge of all the different products that are out there. Our goal at Jaxta was to try to make sure that we were never out of sync with what the distributors and the labels had.
Right. No, it's rigorous information.
You will be out of sync if you're updating your information to a place that's not your distribritor. So You're going to be out of sync at that point. So that's why we did it that way. But it's a great product.
So here's another thing that I'd like to just point out is SongWhip. And SongWhip is really interesting because you can put a Spotify link into this thing and it tells you everywhere that you can stream it. So it's remarkable in that way. Like for instance, if we go and let's just take Spotify and open the web player and we find, let's see, just any given thing like here's one of my albums. Great. And we can go here and we copy album link. And then we go back here to SongWhip and we make a link. And then I can paste the Spotify link in. And it makes a page of everywhere. And it's beautiful too, as far as the art and everything goes, of everywhere you can get this. And so if I go to Tidal, that I prefer to use Tidal, for instance. I actually prefer to use Cobas, but here is my music, and it starts. And so that's a super, again, this is where the metadata comes and the rubber hits the road of being able to do stuff. So that, I think if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. But otherwise, I just wanted to show a few of those things.
I think, Steve, I think you did a really great job of illustrating a point that how important metadata is, especially in a world where there are literally hundreds of thousands of new songs every week, for people to be able to find your work. So I think there's a really, really critical aspect to that we all need to be really mindful of. And yes, I know the last thing we all need on another session is one more stressor, one more piece of data, one more software app that we have to run. But boy, it's just going to become increasingly important over time. So let me kind of take some questions back. So let me actually go to Dick, Vicky, and Maureen for comments before we open the room up to questions. So Vicky, do you have anything or any best practices or things that you want to add to the discussion this evening?
Well, I think that one of the things that I do a lot of public speaking at events with artists, and one of the things that I often hear is people say, oh, I know I should register my song, and I know I should figure out the splits of who did what, but I'm just going to wait. I don't want to mess with it. I'm just going to put it out and put it up on SoundCloud. And if it's a hit, then I'll deal with all of that. And I was like, that is, if your song becomes a hit, if your song blows up, the last thing that you're going to be thinking about is getting your metadata right. And it is a discipline around making sure that when that music is mixed in the studio and it's exactly the way you want it, and before you put it out into the wild, that you cover yourself, that you make sure that you have a distributor that can assign an ISRC code to the sound recording, that you register your song with your PR, if you're a composer, with the PRO, and you get an ISWC assigned to it. And that you make sure everything is accurate, and that you have all of the information in there, because Sound Exchange pays different people than MRI does, and music, all of these different entities. So get things right when you're producing a song. It's just the final, check the final boxes and get it right in the studio. And I really advocate for this, not only for yourself, but you have other bandmates, and you have people that are collaborating with you on these projects, and even one person who doesn't do the right thing can end up causing all sorts of problems for the rest of the contributors to the album.
And I just want to kind of reinforce a couple of points on that. And Vicky, I think you made a really good point. Let me just extend on that just a little bit. Particularly in music publishing, there's something that's called the black box. The black box is the sum of all the royalties of all of the works which we could not find an owner for. And after a certain amount of time, that black box money gets distributed, and it tends to get distributed to the things that were properly attributed. And with sometimes the money landing disproportionately at the major publishers, because often they control how the black box is split up. And that black box is distributed, in the case of European collection societies, on a statutory basis after a 2 or 3 year period in most instances. So what that really means is that if you don't have it registered right, not only are you not going to get paid for it, but somebody else is going to get your money.
Right.
So let's not forget about that as well. The other thing is that we're in a world now where, if you're lucky enough to have some success with your music, there are people who are out there right now buying your catalog, buying up catalogs for multiples of net publisher share or whatever your publishing royalties would be in. This includes companies like Hypnosis, Primary Wave, a number of players who are in the market doing this right now, who are just in the business of buying royalty streams, because from their perspective, these guys have come to the realization that a good song, a consistently earning song, looks a lot like a cash flow stream, like an insurance policy. So they're now banking them.
Right.
And those payouts are determined on the revenues that you've been paid and collected from having your work properly registered. So increasingly important, and thank you for bringing those issues up.
And it
Maureen,
looks back, like with any of these catalog deals, they look back at least 3 years. So, you know, if you go back to the comment of we'll figure it out if it's a hit, okay, so you release something and it takes a year for it to become a hit, you've probably lost a whole year of revenues, because everybody has slightly different monetization rules in YouTube and Facebook and Spotify and all, you know, everyone holds money in conflicts or in perpetuity for different periods of time. And if you actually get everything sorted, yes, you might recover some of that money, but you've probably lost really, really precious data and analytics as well as revenues. And you just, that's kind of water over the bridge. You just don't get that. You never get that back.
yeah, it's not like you're going to be able to claw it back once it's gone.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Vicki. Maureen, as we go into this, do you have any last bits of advice before we go over to questions to everybody? And again, thank you for all the great work you've done with the P&E wing of the Academy. We really appreciate it. I believe you're muted.
I love what Vicky says when she says that, you know, if you don't do it at the beginning and you say, oh, I'm just going to do it later, that's not going to work anymore. She's just really right about that. You have to designate. It used to be the producer was responsible, and you know, but somebody on your project has to document those important things. And Jim, I don't have screen sharing, and it would take me a while to link to the 20 basic things that you should be trying to collect. But if you have it.
I do have that.
Okay,
And I will put a link in the chat to that now. But
yeah.
Maureen's mentioning the 20 basic things that you should have as for your project. So please continue, Maureen. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, no, that's all I was going to say. Is it's a list of the 20 pieces of information you should be documenting on the basic 20, right? If nothing else, someone on your project needs to be keeping track of this, and so you have it, and you can get it to everywhere it needs to go when you can.
I am dropping that link right now into the group chat.
Yeah. And you can always go to, it's www, of course, producers and A-N-D, no ampersand like in our name. So producers and engineers.com, and then scroll down to technical guidelines, and it's there as well.
Fantastic. And this is, you know, the basic information. Who are the artists, where it was recorded, when was recorded, who were the players on the session, who was the composer. And then there's some requests for fields that you may or may not have early on in the session, like the ISWC and things like that. But the more of it you have, the INRI, you know, the name identifier, the more of this information you have and you can supply with the session file, the better off you'll be. So thank you for mentioning that. And again, thanks for all the great work you guys are doing at the Academy. Dick, so let me come back to you on this. Any kind of last comments, questions, or pieces of advice as we kind of dive into this brave new world?
Sure. So I have two, really. The first piece is a selfish one, in that it's about JAXTA. So if you go to JAXTA and would like to claim your credits, you can do that. As an engineer, you can claim, so JAXTA is built around the idea not just of artists, but around the idea of personalities. So if you're a producer, if you're an engineer, if you are officially listed in the credits, you can claim your profile on JAXTA, and you can do that by getting a free JAXTA Pro account. We have, it's called a Pro account, which is the one that lets you claim your credits, and that's available free until the end of this year. So it'll be a good time to go do that if you have not done so already. And Steve was nice enough to put the link up in the post that you put in the chat. So that's the first thing. The second thing is more general, and we were talking about this last night, and I had this thing run through my head, and I was thinking, creation, collation, commerce. So
Three C's.
the 3 C's. And just to quickly break those down, creation is exactly what it sounds like. So, you know, if you think of any piece of music that you're working with as containing those three C's, the creation piece, there's a huge variety of tools to make it simple for you once you've created a piece of music to log that information, to log your splits, to log the contributors, which then moves you to the collation piece, which is where you're going to want to think about where do I want that information to show up. Do I want to make sure that my information is correct at Sound Exchange? Let's go to Sound Exchange. Let's look and see what information they have. Let's go and see what information is at the various DSPs. So this is the collation process for me, where you're figuring out how to move to the last piece, which is the commerce piece. And the commerce piece, it just flows straight through. The commerce piece is really where all of this is headed. And it's, I hope that all of you that are watching this today have seen how interlaced and ubiquitous commerce is going to be with respect to metadata. It's directly tied to metadata. Everything that you're going to do, from performing music to being paid accurately on it, to you know, being able to find music when you talk to your smart speaker, it's all connected to what you do at the start. So I'm so pleased that Jim gave us the opportunity to talk about this in this context. And you've heard great things, I think, from not just us, but from Steve and from a lot of people today. So let's go to the questions. And
Okay, fantastic. So first question that I want to just repeat from the chat came in earlier from Bill, and Bill's question was, how does Grace Note fit into all of this? And we can expand that to Grace Note, Macrovision, Rovi, whoever the latest is. Grace Note is, of course, now owned by Nielsen of TV ratings fame. Dick, could you kind of overlay the Grace Note in the context of the rest of the industry for us?
Sure. So I'm sure all of you, probably all of you, remember CDDB, going back a long time. You know, I can still remember the first time I put my CD into my computer and the information showed up on my computer, and I thought it was magic. So CDDB was the precursor to Grace Note. Grace Note was really one of, if not the first, one of the very first, I think it was the first, metadata storage and licensing entities. And TiVo got into the business, and you know, they built huge databases of information, you know, at this point on relatively old platforms, but massive storage of database and, excuse me, of metadata, and license that metadata to the various services that need access to it. So All Music Guide was part of TiVo, for instance. And you all know what All Music Guide is. I don't need to go over that. But you know, they're still in the business in one way or another. Grace Note is still in the business. It still licenses metadata. Many of them are trying to move a little bit out of the business of focusing on the information itself and more into the right side of the business, which is something that Jaxta isn't doing. We're focused on the information itself. So that's really the answer to that question.
Super, thank you for that. Are there any other questions from the floor? Wait a second here. A question from Jacob. I work with a music production library as a music creator and mastering engineer. Did I gather from our conversation that they are not necessarily also the distributor? And in the case of a production library, it depends on how you're monetizing it. So some of the production libraries are out there actually just generating Spotify plays, and submitting via a third-party distributor like a DistroKid. And some of the music production libraries that are out there actually shipping directly to the customer. So it really sort of depends on who your distribution, your contact point is, to your end customer, if that helps you. Also, from Jacob, should I be receiving royalties for the tracks that you master? Not really the subject of this today. Most of the mastering engineers I know are not receiving royalties for the work that they do, but there have certainly been exceptions to that rule. Don Passman's What You Need to Know About the Music Business, or All You Need to Know About the Music Business, is a great reference to start with if you haven't read that book. So Don just wanted you to repeat, Dick, the middle C, creation, and the middle C was collation, Don.
Thank you. Yes, creation, collation, and commerce.
Excellent. Great mnemonic device.
When I saw that in there, I saw, what is the middle C? I thought, is this a trick question?
Yeah. It's two to the left, where it's the C that's like 3 or 4 keys to the left of the center of the piano.
I didn't read the second part of it. I was sitting there looking at, what is the middle C? What is he asking?
Excellent. Last call for questions on this issue. Otherwise,
I have
if not, yes, go ahead, Ivan.
Hi, you guys are awesome, by the way. Thank you so much for doing this. Wonderful information. I run a recording studio, and I'm getting to mastering now, and I'm using WaveLab, and I can enter a lot of metadata in WaveLab, and I was just wondering how far should I go? Should I put in there? Because I know I can put some credits and stuff. Is it better to do it at this stage, or should I do it with one of these other services you guys were talking about?
So I'm not familiar. Maureen, are you familiar with what WaveLab is exporting?
No, but I haven't heard that it's one of the companies that's using RIN. There's only a few, but I mean, there's certainly using it to document what you're doing is probably fine, but the ultimate goal is to be using a standardized way, which we believe is the RIN, Recording Information Notification Standard, that was created by DDEX, the International Standards Organization, so that things don't need to be rekeyed, so that we have interoperability between workstations and anywhere else it needs to go, and it can ultimately be delivered to the label in a RIN file and then fit into the whole DDEX ecosystem, which has everything from release notifications to sales reports. So it would fit into all of those standards. So that's what the ideal is, but certainly putting your data there is better than not having it somewhere. So is that a good enough answer?
Yes, thank you. But also, if we can have these all this metadata embedded in the actual WAV file or MP3 file itself, so that they don't have to go somewhere else to pull it.
Well, that's sort of problematic, especially right now. There have been some tests done by the archiving societies, and if information is put in the header of the WAV files, it gets destructed or dropped out or damaged in going from workstation to workstation or wherever it needs to go. So it really, that space on the WAV file isn't really designed to hold this kind of information or that much information. So what has happened is there is a standard for the ISRC code to be embedded in the WAV files. Remember, the ISRC code is the identifier of the unique recording, right? It's the unique identifier, theoretically. I mean, I know there's some errors, but the unique identifier of the that specific recording. And those unique identifiers, that's why they're so important, like ISRC codes, the ISWC code for the song, and the ISNI code for people, which we could talk about at another time, are the things that tie the actual recording to the data. right?
Awesome.
Yeah. So, I don't want to miss the opportunity, and this is a subject for another night. But since we've talked about music services, I want to remind all of you that when you're mastering for a CD and you're mastering for music service, it really wants to be a different file. Every music service has a different 0 dB reference point, and they're all, no matter the music service, they're all going to transcode the WAV file that you send to them into a bunch of different distribution formats. And every time we deconstruct a filter and reconstruct a filter, you cannot help but add gain. So if you're mastering to the rails and delivering it to a music service, they're going to clip it. Just be aware of it. They are going to clip it. Leave your headroom. No more clipped files on music services, please.
That's great. That is a whole nother panel, but I'm so glad you threw that in there.
Oh my God.
Don't
It drives me
overload
crazy.
the input.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Yes, when you construct a filter, there is no way to reconstruct a filter without adding gain. Law of physics. JJ, I wish you were here. You would have been proud that I said that today. JJ is my chief scientist. I currently work as the chief operating officer at Immersion Networks. We have developed a platform for immersive audio, but we've also developed, by the way, just as an aside, and we hope to have in market soon, a codec which actually does have information capabilities built inside it. So more about that on another day. But we're at about 7:30. A couple of last questions. Sound Credit does have, Steve has mentioned astutely that Sound Credit has both a standalone app and a VST plugin for capturing metadata, which is super, super helpful. And again, as Maureen has mentioned, that it exports to the RIN, which means it can go everywhere via DDEX. So important to do that. And yes, there is an ISO standard for ISRC embedding in the WAV file. So let's not miss that. Other than that, in the absence of any questions, we're about at the end of our time. And I want to thank Maureen, Vicky, and Dick, especially Dick out in Sleepy Hollow, New York, working late into the evening to pass his knowledge on here. Vicky is one of the most consistent people I know at giving back to this industry. And I jokingly call her, I jokingly refer to Vicky as the All-American Music Executive, but you should know that only one person that I'm aware of on this call was actually an All-American athlete who went to college on a swimming scholarship, and that would be Vicky. It's certainly not. Go Hawks. You're muted, so no revenge. You're still muted.
Jim and I figured out that we went to the same university and at the same time. I think we were like a year apart. And then we later figured out when he was working in Minneapolis out at Paisley Park, and I was working at Minnesota Public Radio, and we had a lot of the artists coming in and performing live in our studio that he was working at. And we didn't make any of these connections until, 25 years later.
So I love tying it back to my sister of the corn. And then Maureen, again, thank you in addition to all your work with the Academy for putting in a late night to advance the cause here. We really appreciate it. And again, thank you everybody for having us. And hopefully if we've accomplished our goal here, our goal was really to just keep you thinking about this and to start your own individual exploration about metadata and how important it is. So once again, thank you everybody. And thank you, Vicky, Dick, and Maureen.
Thank you, Jim, for hosting.
Yes, thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye, everybody.
My pleasure to provide you with excellent service. Please stay online afterwards for a brief survey of today's.
Everybody take care.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.